Today we're recapping an American romantic war drama, Atonement. Spoilers ahead. The year is 1935, and while major countries of the world are involved in the tireless routine of war, 13-year-old Brioni Tallis types away in her bedroom in England. She writes a romantic play, just like every other kid her age, and titles it The Trial of Arabella. So, Brioni's the daughter of an extremely wealthy family, which explains the servants, housekeepers, and cooks. She wants to put the play up for everyone to watch in a family gathering, including Robbie Turner, the housekeeper's son. Yeah, that's his beautiful face right there. But Robbie unfortunately can't make it. He really just wants to read the play rather than see a performance of it. She allows her mother to read it, and of course she gets the pat on the back and a genuine motherly smile. While the review's great, the performance might not be so perfect. Brioni employs the acting services of children, a pair of twins who aren't willing to act, and their older sister Lola. As rehearsals are about to start, we also meet Danny Hardman, a servant in the house, who seems to have an insane crush on Lola. Next up, we meet Cecilia, the older and freer sister of Brioni. It appears Cecilia used to have a thing with Robbie, a thing which particularly annoyed Brioni. One would wonder why. Anyways, Brioni has written this play for her brother, Leon, who she expects to be back any day. As Brioni prepares her cast for her first rehearsals, they're interrupted by Danny, a servant, who seems to be in love with the twins' older sister. At the window, she sees the worst thing she could have possibly seen. It's Robbie and Cecilia having an argument. Brioni sees her sister take off her clothes and step into the fountain. She explains the situation the best way she can. Robbie's ordering her older sister to do things, like telling her to get into the fountain without her clothes. Wild imagination, Brioni, but here's what really happened. It's an argument between the two right next to the fountain, and this causes Robbie to break a vase. Robbie gets concerned for Cecilia and tells her not to move, but she does the exact opposite. She moves into the water, picks up the last pieces of the vase, and walks away angrily. Cause of the argument? Well, Robbie wants to become a doctor so he can pay Cecilia's father back. And while he tries to help her with the vase, it breaks off. She goes into the fountain with her underwear to pick up the broken pieces and storms off immediately. So, Brioni, it really wasn't anything sexual. Before we go on, like the video, smash the subscribe button, and turn on that notification bell to join our expendable squad. Nevertheless, she's devastated. Come on, how would you feel if you found your crush frolicking with your sister? Well, in the spirit of good news, Leon arrives with a friend, Paul, who he expects would become friends with his sister Cecilia and perhaps lovers in the future. But rather, Paul speaks with Lola, the sister of the twins, and we notice some kind of chemistry between them. I don't think that was the assignment, Paul. He gives Lola a bar of chocolate, adding that the invention would be great for soldiers in the emergence of a war. Robbie, on the other hand, feels apologetic towards Cecilia. And to show this, he tries to write an honest letter. But you know how mischievous everyone wants to be once in a while? Well, Robbie decides to make a private joke by writing a sexual letter to Cecilia. And in it, he writes about his sexual attraction to the young woman and makes sexual jokes about her body. Dirty Robbie finds it funny, laughing to himself with a cigarette in his hand. With his joke now out of the way, he realizes that he still hasn't written a letter of apology. He gets to work, confesses that her presence makes him feel lightheaded and foolish, before consequently asking her to forgive him. With this sort of letter, is there really any woman that would say no? Except there is, and all thanks to an avoidable mistake. So Robbie writes his formal apology letter and gives it to Brioni to give to her sister. But here's the mistake. The letter he actually gave Brioni wasn't the apology letter, but the one where he made sexual jokes and confesses dirty thoughts. Oops. As you perhaps already guessed, Brioni opens up the letter to read it, and her surprise is expected. She hands it over to her sister Cecilia, but the words keep ringing in her head. Unable to keep it all to herself, she explains what she just read to Lola, who in turn is being frustrated by her siblings, the twins. Lola calls Robbie a sex maniac and advises Brioni to call the police, but Brioni just needs to make sure Lola wouldn't tell anyone, and she asks her to make a promise not to. And what was Cecilia's reaction to the letter? You could say she was blown out of the water. Fortunately for Robbie, he finds Cecilia before dinner and apologizes for the letter, but things quickly take a turn we never saw coming. Cecilia admits that she's secretly in love with Robbie, who of course is in love with her too. Interestingly, they proceed to passionately make love. But this moment of passion is interrupted by somebody. Of course, no one other than Brioni. Brioni believes Robbie was raping her sister, and she shows anger by being rude to him during dinner. After Lola shows the family her Chinese burns, one she got from her trouble with the twins, everyone realizes that the twins are actually missing. Not exactly missing, they basically ran away because they really wanted to go back home. However, a search party is organized. But in the dark, with the men searching for the mischievous twins, more drama unfurls. Brioni joins the search, but rather than finding the boys, she finds Lola being raped by a man in the dark. Shouting, the man disappears into the bushes and Lola cries. Brioni speaks with a disoriented Lola, who wouldn't be after such a degrading treatment. Isn't it quite strange that Brioni found two separate people having sex in the same night? And it only makes sense to Brioni that Robbie is the one who raped Lola, because she thinks he raped her sister Cecilia, so it's only logical that he raped Lola too. Burning with anger and conviction to make Robbie pay for his supposed crimes, Brioni tells the police that she saw Robbie with her own eyes raping Lola. She then finds the naughty letter Robbie wrote to Cecilia, tendering it as evidence against the man. Kinda makes somebody wonder why she would go this far to get him arrested. Eventually, Robbie finds the twins and returns them back to the family. But the smile on his face washes off when he sees the police officers outside the house. Mr. Nice Guy Robbie's quickly arrested by the police. It's the words of Brioni and Lola against his. What are the chances of the son of a servant against theirs? It's 1939, and 4 years have gone by. Second World War is underway, and all the great countries are in dire need of soldiers. Robbie had been in prison all these years, suffering for the rape of Lola, something which he never did. He's released from prison on the condition that he fights in the war, in the Battle of France against the Germans. Now a soldier, Robbie explains his story to his colleagues after they get separated from their unit. 6 months ago, we realized that he fortunately finds Cecilia, who now practices as a nurse. It's been a long time since these lovebirds have been together, so it explains the awkwardness at first. They drink tea at a restaurant and Cecilia pleads with Robbie to come back to her. But it's a beautiful love story in its own way, especially as she broke off ties with her family because of him. It's hard enough having to lose your lover to prison, but even harder if your family is the reason for the prison. The lovebirds get back together for a brief while, but Cecilia has to leave for Balham, where she practices as a nurse and lives. Oh, that brings us to Brioni, who should now be 18 years of age. Cecilia says in a letter to Robbie that Brioni found her old hospital and is training to be a nurse. Much to everyone's surprise, Brioni chose not to go to Cambridge, but would rather be a nurse like her older sister. If this sounds like an attempt to make Cecilia forgive her, then you're right. But C is not ready to let it go, even after all these years. Back in France, Robbie and 2 other soldiers struggle to find the unit. At the same time, despite his tough exterior, Robbie's trying so hard not to break down. They arrive at Dunkirk, where they're supposed to wait and be evacuated. Despite the promise of good news, the island is a total mess. There are over 300,000 soldiers with no idea on what they're supposed to do. Fights are breaking out between the soldiers. And there's one particular soldier who goes around shooting horses dead. Really? What kind of sick man shoots horses dead? Unluckily for Robbie, he's got an injury which is slowly eating him up alive. He begins to hallucinate, even talking to one of the framed pictures in the room. He even remembers the night he was arrested and how Cecilia begged him to come back to her. Now, let's take a trip to see Brioni on the other side. After all these years, she regrets her actions against Robbie and of course Cecilia. She tries to apologize to her sister, but C wouldn't have any of it. It's not that easy to forgive an accusation like that. Brioni does a lot at the hospital, working hard hours and writing countless letters to her sisters, but none is enough to make her stop feeling guilty. In one scene, Brioni sits with a dying French soldier, who seems to have met Cecilia in the past. The soldier talks about how kind she is, and adds that he's known Brioni since she was a child. He confesses his love, even adding that his mother expects them to get married in the summer. Brioni doesn't exactly show if she remembers him, nor does she dispute his claims. But she likes the story, because she eventually tells him her real name, and even holds his hand tighter before he dies. It's a different side of Brioni, a mature and compassionate side to a once angry teenager. Anyway, Brioni gets the news that Lola's getting married to a factory owner, none other than Paul Marshall, the visitor the family had 4 years back. Brioni attends the ceremony, and it causes her to discover the truth that had been buried all these years. Paul was the rapist that night, not Robbie. Remember how Paul and Lola shared some chemistry the first time they met? Seems like Paul took it to an extreme end. Brioni's shattered, but she knows that telling the truth would come with its many problems. Still willing to do what's right, she visits Cecilia and explains her findings to her. Surprise, surprise, Robbie's right there in Cecilia's house, living together with her. Brioni's apologetic for what she did years ago, but Robbie doesn't want to listen. He lost 4 years of his life, was forced to fight in the war, and can never again attain any military position due to the nature of his enlistment. But the point of his anger remains that Brioni is failing to take responsibility for her action. Eventually, Cecilia calms him down, and the conversation begins. Brioni suggests that she would correct her testimony to include Paul, but C quickly corrects her, adding that Lola would now be an unreliable witness. What were you thinking, Brioni? Lola's married to him now. Finally, Robbie chips in, and he explains that they can get the testimony changed and get Paul to pay for his actions. Cecilia further suggests that Brioni includes everything she remembers about Danny Hardman, the servant who had a crush on Lola, since every other member of the family thought of him as a potential suspect. But Brioni wouldn't make the same mistake twice. She maintains her conviction that Paul Marshall was the rapist, not the poor servant boy. However, just like I mentioned earlier, Lola is married to Paul Marshall now, and it'd be difficult to get her to testify against him. Now, it's several decades later, and Brioni is an elderly woman, a successful novelist suffering from vascular dementia. Brioni's on an interview with her new and last novel titled Atonement. She explains that the book is an autobiographical account of her life and her experiences during the war. Regarding her illness, she tells the interviewer that it's similar to having tiny strokes every single day. Let's take a brief moment to forget everything she did and take pity on this strong woman. Despite it being her last novel, she explains that she wrote several drafts during her time at the St. Thomas Hospital during the war. If this sounds like the perfect ending, hold up till you hear this. Brioni confesses that she actually never went to visit Cecilia and Robbie, adding that there's a scene in the book that says she did, but in fact, she never did. This eventually represents the only fictional part of the book. In reality, she explains, Robbie and Cecilia never reunited. Robbie died during the war. He died of septicemia right before he could be evacuated from Dunkirk. And Cecilia? Well, she died a few months after Robbie in the Balham tube station after an unfortunate bombing happened there. Brioni wanted to give the two the ending that they actually deserved, and her book is the only way. In fiction, they became married and had a beautiful family, while in reality they suffered a tragic death due to the ongoing war. In the last scene, which is most definitely imaginary, Cecilia and Robbie are happily reunited, having a great time by the sea. And they live in a house by the sea, the same one they had always wanted to reunite at. This was a review for Atonement, which was directed by Joe Wright and produced by Tim Bevan, Eric Fellner, and Paul Webster. It featured James McAvoy, Keira Knightley, Saoirse Ronan, Ramala Garai, Vanessa Redgrave, and a lot of others.